So the topic is peace, and I'd like to start by just asking you to cast your minds back to 75 years ago and the formation of the United Nations. And I know Rotarians were involved, and we're very proud that we were involved way back then. And the opening statement was, "We, the peoples of the United Nations, are determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war." And that's why I've called this presentation "Ending the Scourge of War." And around the very first resolution, and most people aren't aware of this, resolution number 1 from the United Nations General Assembly was to eliminate nuclear weapons. There must never be another Hiroshima. There must never be another Nagasaki. And around the same time, UNESCO was formed. And again, Rotarians were involved in that, to promote world peace and security, not through the barrel of a gun, but through education and the arts and sciences and culture. And this really, really profound statement: since wars begin in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And I just find that very profound. And it's engraved in a stone in front of the UNESCO building. Wars don't begin because of a dispute over a boundary. Wars don't begin because of a dispute over oil. They begin in the minds of men and women. So that was the dream. And my question for you is, how do you think we are doing? How do you think we are doing? And I have another question. It's a bit of a parable, really. Why don't these fleas jump out of the open jar? Now, before we look at these questions more deeply, I want to share a story I heard from Kathy Kelly, who is an American peace activist, a wonderful peace activist. And I'm going to let her tell you the story. It's just going to take a minute so that you hear it the way I did.
Telling a story that troubles me deeply. I learned of it through Jeffrey Stern, writing for the New York Times Magazine. And it's about a very remote district in Yemen called Arhab. And the people in Arhab were facing a really alarming situation. They were running out of water, like, thirsty animals that would starve, and plants that can't be irrigated, and families that need water. So they took a gamble. They pooled money together, and they bought a rig. And they were really hoping this rig would work and it could dig deeper and deeper for water. No water. The rig broke twice. They had it mired in mud. It looked as though all of the money they borrowed and pooled was not going to work. They were doomed. And then one night they struck water. Well, you can imagine, Eureka. There was celebration, there was dancing, there was singing until the wee hours of the morning. And then people that were part of the celebration, men, I suppose all men, were staggering back to their homes in the dark. And what they didn't know is that overhead was a huge missile that had been made in the United States by Raytheon, sold to the Saudis, and the Saudis had targeted their celebration. And so when this missile, a Paveway missile, exploded, these shards of steel went flying through the air 8 times faster than the speed of sound. People were disemboweled, they were beheaded, they were maimed, and many were killed. And the people in Arhab were doing a good thing. They pooled their resources to try to find water. And so I see this as a story of peace literacy that's so needed all across the United States, all across the world. We have to become literate in the stories of those who bear the brunt of our wars.
But we have to become literate in the stories of the people who bear the brunt of our wars. And we have learned a lot, haven't we, about what happened in Afghanistan. We were getting these horrific headlines last fall about the desperation and the fear of the people left behind in Afghanistan, clinging to the landing gear of airplanes and then plunging to their death. And all of the hand wringing and all of the sort of teeth gnashing. How could this have happened? How could this have happened? And now here we are just a few months later, and we're beating the drums of war again. Only this time it's in the Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. So I say, it's when we start to say, how could this happen? How could this happen? It's important that we have the big picture and we kind of we recognize what is going on here. And since World War II, since the United Nations determined to save us from the scourge of war, the United States alone has killed or helped to kill over 20 million people, has overthrown at least 36 governments, has interfered in at least 84 foreign elections, has attempted to assassinate over 50 foreign leaders, and has dropped bombs on people in over 30 countries. Now, this is really hard to hear. I heard this as one sentence in a debate I was listening to on whether there was such a thing as a just war. And I was out of my chair thinking, holy moly. And my husband got a 3-ring binder and we started to research this. Could it be true? Is this really true? And it is true. And it's not just the United States. Since World War II, there have been 250 wars. Hundreds of millions of people have been affected. And we're not grasping that war is the #1 contributor to the climate crisis. The US Department of Defense alone creates more toxic, hazardous chemical waste than the world's 5 largest chemical companies combined. And the nuclear arms race is heating up again, and we're modernizing and expanding our nuclear arsenals. And we're now at $2 trillion taxpayer dollars a year that are going into war and the preparations for war. That's our money, yours and my money, $1 trillion from the United States alone, 500 billion from the NATO countries, and 500 billion from the rest of the world combined. And that's our money. So my question, why is there still war? UNESCO said wars begin in the minds of men and women. So clearly the minds of men and women are still not where we need them to be. Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so the minds of men and women are at a level of consciousness now that isn't allowing us to end the use of war. We can come at it in another way as well. John Horgan did exhaustive research using the scientific method to search for reasons, for correlations between war and any other factor. And he found only one. Wars are made by cultures that celebrate or tolerate war. And I live in Canada. According to the Institute of Economics and Peace, we are one of the 10 most peaceful countries in the world. And I live in a country that tolerates war. Not in Canada, of course, over there somewhere. So we can think of it like this. The 250 wars since World War II are the tip of the iceberg. But the culture of war is way deeper and exists continually and is always there. And we're not even conscious of it half the time. It's in our heads and our books and our movies and our toys and our monuments, our historical markers, our education systems, our advertisement. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. I was in Palm Springs for Memorial Day in 2021. And admittedly, I was looking at this through my Canadian eyes, but it felt like a celebration. We're much more somber in Canada, but the kids were out and the picnics were happening and the jets were flying overhead and the tanks were going down the road and the school kids were marching, and it felt like a major celebration. And I'm thinking, really, do we want to be celebrating this? There were Gold Star families going down the street. But let's look at Rotary culture. Rotary culture is different. We're already at a higher level of consciousness with regard to peace than the regular person on the street. We think about peace. We value peace. We study peace. We understand the difference between the absence of war, the absence of the fear of violence, and the presence of the attitudes and the institutes and structures that need to be in place for peace to be sustainable. We partnered with the Institute of Economics and Peace, and we understand their pillars of positive peace. And we're very proud in Rotary that our 7 areas of focus correspond to Institute of Economics and Peace's pillars of peace. We know that every humanitarian project we do around the world is helping build positive peace. We know that. But I have a question. If we focus only on positive peace, and if we don't also work for actual peace, i.e. the absence of war, and if we don't even use the word war in Rotary Action Group for Peace circles, And if we remain unaware of the attitudes and the institutions and the structures and the systems that are allowing war to continue, according to John Horgan, doesn't that make us a culture that tolerates war? So what are we tolerating? Well, we can look at the sort of balance scales that we used to have 100 years ago, and we can put the militarism on one side and peace on the other. And because of our relationship with Institute of Economics and Peace, we can trust their data. And they tell us that the amount of money that's going into militarism is $5.9 trillion a year. That's the impact on the economy. Worldwide humanitarian efforts, 80 billion. And I'm adding in Rotary Foundation grants, another 70 million, because I think that's really significant. So what's the total? $5.9 trillion on the side of military, $80 billion on the side of peace. Or for every dollar that's being invested in positive peace building, $74 are going into militarism and basically undoing what we're doing. Now, I have a degree in math and physics, but you don't have to have a degree in math and physics to know where these balance scales are going. It's just physics, it's just gravity. And the only way that we're going to be able to have a significant impact is if we can shift some of this money from militarism to positive peace building. And the only way we're going to be able to do that, we're not going to be able to do it without a shift in consciousness. We're going to need to shift in consciousness. Now, that's not as difficult as it might sound for those of us in Rotary, because we already think about peace. We already care, and we are already focused on building positive peace. And if we also focus on ending war, actual peace, we can have a hugely impactful difference. What we need to do is get educated on the human and environmental impact of war, understand the attitudes, institutions, and structures that are allowing war to continue, and then we can work to stop allowing war. And we can shift consciousness from militarism to peace. So that's within Rotary. But how do we raise consciousness in the rest of the world? And we have come to understand that we don't need 90% of a population to adopt a new way of thinking for the population to shift. In fact, there's usually a tipping point where if just one more person tunes in, consciousness will shift and the awareness can be picked up by almost everyone. And we know that intuitively to be true. We just saw that recently in the last few years. I mean, #MeToo just exploded into our consciousness. There was a tipping point. One more thing happened. And then we became aware, and we're much more aware now. And the same thing for Black Lives Matters. There was a tipping point. One more thing happened, and then it exploded in our consciousness, and we became aware. So we know intuitively that that's the way it happens. But we can also turn to the research. And Dr. Erica Chenoweth, professor at Harvard, asked the question, what % of a population must change its thinking to shift the entire population? And you're going to be blown away, guys. It's only 3.5%. Only 3.5% have to change their thinking and their actions that go with their thinking for the rest of the population to shift. And I believe in every single fiber of my being that we in Rotary are uniquely placed to make that shift happen. We are everywhere. We have 70 clubs, 75 clubs in Russia. We are in every country, almost every country around the world, and we care about peace. We can make that shift happen. So how do we do that? Einstein asked another question, what can a fish tell us about water? And the fact of the matter is nothing. The fish can't tell us anything. The fish has been swimming in that ocean all its life. It really can't tell us anything. And those of us who are on shore can see more clearly than the fish. We have perspective on water that the fish does not have. And so when I apply this to war and we ask, why did a military superpower fail in Afghanistan? How could this happen? I say, it is those of us who are on shore from the industrial, military, political, media complex. Those of us who are outside, we're the ones who have the clear perspective that wars begin in the minds of men and women. And as long as we believe that war can be justified, peace is not possible. And similarly, the issue with nuclear weapons and the escalation of the nuclear arms race, the fact that we could be blowing our planet up 100 times over with only 10% of the nuclear arms we have on the planet today. Those of us, you and me, outside the industrial military political complex, we're the ones with perspective. Don't let anyone tell you anything different. We know that peace does not come from the threat of violence. And as long as we have nuclear weapons, peace is not possible. So Kathy Kelly says we have to become literate in the stories of the people who bear the brunt of our wars if we're going to raise peace consciousness. So let's go back to the story of what happened to those poor farmers in Ahab in Yemen. Jeffrey Stern works for the New York Times magazine. He traveled to Yemen. He went to Ahab. He went to the bomb site. He found a remnant of the bomb. He found a serial number on the remnant of the bomb, and he traced it back to a factory in Tucson, Arizona. And he went to the factory in Tucson, Arizona, and he interviewed two people who worked on the factory floor. And he found that morale was really high in the factory because they believed that their work was keeping US military personnel safe, because their bombs could be dropped from a very high level, so there was no risk of return enemy fire, and they could be dropped with pinpoint precision. So the risk of harming innocent civilians was virtually nil. So their morale was really high. And not only that, Raytheon had been very clever and had blown up pictures of brothers and daughters and fathers of people who worked on the factory floor. And these blown up pictures were placed in prominent places in the factory. So they weren't just protecting the military personnel, they were protecting their family. And these are the kinds of stories we have to believe if we're going to be building weapons that are going to decapitate people and boil them to death and disembowel them. And Brock says that the founder of Labor Against the Arms Trade, that if we bothered to ask people who work on the factory floors of these factories, they would say that they would infinitely prefer working on something that was life-affirming rather than life-destroying. So I can't speak to the discombobulation that must have happened in the minds of those men when they found out what had actually been done with their bombs. But I can say that studies have now shown that federal spending on domestic programs in healthcare, education, clean energy, and infrastructure create more jobs, dollar for dollar, than military spending. It's a myth that we need these military jobs for our economy. So get literate in the stories of the people who bear the brunt of our wars, and also look at our own thinking. And here's an example from a week ago. All of the sort of beating the drums of war that's been going on in the media, certainly in the US and in Canada, and the pundits who are saying we need more weapons to stop Russian aggression, and other pundits are saying no, we need a diplomatic solution to stop Russian aggression. And the underlying theme is Russian aggression. We have to stop Russian aggression. And I wonder, is there another side to the story? And this is a chart of the military exercises done by the United States and NATO allies, including Canada, in 2021 in Europe. I'll blow it up for you, up and down the coast of Russia. And it was called Steadfast Defender 2021, with thousands of personnel, aircraft, surface ships, submarines, nuclear armored vehicles. It was, the largest military exercises that have been done since World War II. And we haven't been reading about this, have we? From our corporate media. And if I were Russian, I might find that a little bit intimidating, because what are they defending against this massive military exercise? In Poland alone, there were 5,700 US troops. Not only that, but all of the countries that I'm showing in this small map that aren't blue have US military bases on them. And you can see the black little towers are nuclear weapons. And where do you think these nuclear weapons are pointed? So I would find that a little threatening along the border of Russia as well, if I were Russia. Imagine if Russia were to come to North America. Let's suppose they want to put a nuclear missile in Cuba and up and down the east coast of the United States and bring in a few tanks and armored vehicles and put them in Mexico and Canada. Now that would be aggressive. That would be aggression. And I don't think that the United States or Canada would take very kindly to that. I want to remind you, Russia has a GDP less than Canada's. I mean, I was talking with a colleague and saying that we might want to cut down on our military expenses and investments in Canada. And he was horrified because he didn't want his grandchildren to have to learn to speak Russian. And I'm going, holy cow. And this is the extent to which I think our media is demonizing Russia. I don't want to have Putin to dinner any more than you do, but I think there's another side to this story. So we have to demilitarize our own thinking. We have to ask the hard questions. We have to wonder, wait a minute, what are Russia's needs here? Russia says that the American press refuses to recognize its legitimate security concerns. And that could be true.
I couldn't find this name Cole.
Is everybody hearing me okay?
Yeah, this is short.
The other thing is to get to the place, as David Swanson says, where the very idea of a just war is just as horrifying to us as charitable child abuse or humanitarian slavery.
The person's going to die.
So can I ask everybody, Duncan, can you go on mute? Can everybody go on mute? Thank you.
Yeah. Because I'm
okay. So everybody, can we go on mute, please? Thank you. So in Rotary, we are people of action, impactful action. And when we see a problem and we see a way in which we can make a significant difference, we want to take action. And we know all about focusing on worldwide goals. We focused on the worldwide goal of eliminating polio from the planet. And we did it brilliantly. We did it strategically. We did it effectively. We were amazing. And so the suggestion now is that we go back to that very first resolution of the United Nations 75 years ago, and we focus on the worldwide goal for endorsement of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, leading to the elimination of nuclear weapons from our planet. Why? Because this is a meaningful goal to everyone. Poll after poll, survey after survey, all around the world shows that people want nuclear weapons off our planet. It's doable, and it represents a significant shift in peace consciousness. So let's take a moment, and look at nuclear weapons. They affect us all, destroy our environment, terrify our scientists. This is the reason why the doomsday clock has been left at 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been, because of the escalating nuclear arms race. And nuclear weapons and the consciousness behind it embody the very consciousness that Einstein says is obstructing our ability to resolve these problems with war. So let's take a moment and look at nuclear consciousness. It's based on fear and threat. We're Rotarians. We know that that's not the way to peace. And it's never enough. We have to expand. We have to modernize. And imagine this. Even as you and I are speaking, there are thousands of military personnel who are training continually so they can launch a nuclear bomb in minutes to destroy our planet. Think about the consciousness that's going on behind that, the mistrust with this whole first strike doctrine, the bullying that's going on. The US alone has threatened to use nuclear weapons at least 30 times. Don't think the threat is not there. If I hold you up with a gun and I rob you, but I don't shoot you, have I used the gun? Yes, I have. The threat is there. Nuclear weapons are being used. The potential for error is astronomical. There are so many people involved, so many personnel handling the weapons. so much technology behind the weapons, so much opportunity for something to go wrong. The experts say that we have been miraculously lucky, and that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Plus the fact that this is singularly undemocratic, that decisions like this that can be made by a few people that will affect billions of us, the staggering waste of taxpayer dollars. I would like you to tell me of one corporation that would put hundreds of billions of dollars into manufacturing a product that it can never use. They wouldn't. The only reason this is happening is because it's taxpayer dollars. And then there's the sheer denial of the humanitarian and environmental consequences. These weapons are pointed at cities. They're pointed at civilians. They're illegal. Not to mention, if we come back to our old-fashioned scales and look at how much they're weighted on to the military side, and we imagine, let's just look at the US budget for nuclear weapons only, and imagine $63 billion a year going into nuclear weapons. And last year it was approved for a 10-year period. Over $63 billion is now approved in the budget to 2030. And imagine if we could shift that money to peace, we would be almost doubling the amount of money that is going into building positive peace. It would be amazing, would have an amazing impact. And the thing is, this is doable. It's doable. There's a straightforward solution. We built them, we can dismantle them. The 9 countries could end the threat with controlled, verifiable disarmament. We could do this. So let's be clear. Nuclear consciousness is based on fear. And it's our job as peace builders to transform that into hope. And there is reason for hope. We have the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We're celebrating the 1-year anniversary, and it makes nuclear weapons illegal for the countries who have signed it, in the same way that chemical weapons and biological weapons and landmines are illegal. And it prohibits, for the countries who have signed it, their cooperation with nuclear power, letting nuclear weapons be transported across their waters or over their territory. And it gives a voice to the 190 countries in the world who don't want nuclear weapons. It's amazing. 135 nations participated in the negotiations, 89 states have signed, and 59 states have ratified. This is so hopeful. And 69 nations did not vote, among them all the nuclear weapon states and all the NATO countries. Well, this is our job, to get worldwide endorsement of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, because that will lead to the nuclear states, our 9 nuclear states, demilitarizing. So what can we do about this within Rotary? Well, in 2020, a small group of Rotarians, and Richard Denton and Anne Frisch, who are on this call, were part of that group, put out a resolution asking the Rotary International Board to consider supporting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it went to the Council on Resolutions, and the vote came back, and only 30% of the representatives were in favor. So what did we do? In 2021, we put forward another resolution. Only this time, we're asking for Rotary International to endorse the treaty. And this time, 3 districts proposed the resolution, 1 in Australia and 2 in Canada. And what happened? Oh, yes, I'm almost forgetting. And hundreds of clubs around the world got copies of the resolution and talked about it within their club and within their districts. It was like a grassroots spreading. This is where I went around doing 30 presentations that Melody was referring to. And the results came back, and this time we had 45% of the core representatives saying yes. Now, in percentage terms, that's a 50% improvement. That's huge. And in fact, meant that if only 24 more districts within Rotary had changed their vote from no to yes, the resolution would have passed. And we knew that many of the people who were voting no were looking at it and thinking they couldn't be political. And we knew that it wasn't a question of being political, it was a question of being nonpartisan. So The other brilliant thing that happened in 2022 is that our president, SHEKHAR MEHTA, appeared on an international panel on eliminating the existential threat of nuclear weapons. And he said things like, Rotarians, it's important to raise awareness about this. And he said, and you can hear him saying this, if only all this money were directed to positive peace, what a wonderful world we would have. And he said, we can take a strong position on this and still be non-political, still be non-partisan in the same way that the International Red Cross has done. So the challenge for 2022 is to get this resolution passed. It's the same representatives. We still don't know who they are. And so we need to educate and inform as many Rotarians as possible and ask them to educate and inform as many Rotarians as possible and spread the word as far as we can. And your club can help. Should you be so inspired, you could discuss it among your club. And if you have agreement within your club, you could ask District 5100 to also endorse the resolution. Because wouldn't it be awesome if when it goes forward this year, it's not 3 districts that have endorsed it, but 20 districts that have endorsed it. And since more than 200 voted for it the last time round, we should be able to find more districts to endorse it. Which brings me back to my fleas. When these fleas were put in the jar, a clear glass pane sheet of glass was put on the top of the jar. And fleas who can jump 3 yards leapt up to jump out of the jar and knocked on the glass pane and fell back down, and leapt up and hit the glass pane and fell back down again. And gradually they learned to leap up and stop just before the glass pane and fall back down again. And once all the fleas were doing that, the glass pane was removed and they never jumped out of the jar. And not only that, but baby fleas born on the jar did not jump out of the jar either. So this is a bit of a metaphor, really, for the way in which we're kind of bouncing against the level of consciousness of the cultures that we are living in as far as peace is concerned. But we're Rotarians. And as I've said before, we really are. We know how to make that leap out of the jar. We really value peace and we can lead the way. And when we do, others will follow. So what am I saying? I am saying that it will take a shift in consciousness for us to achieve world peace. I am saying it's not our current leaders who are going to make this happen. They've been swimming in the sea of militarism their entire adult lives. Their careers are in the sea of militarism. It's we Rotarians who have perspective and a clear commitment to peace. It's part of our DNA. And by working for both positive peace and ending war, we could increase our impact exponentially. And by focusing on the worldwide goal of the endorsement of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, we could make such a significant difference that we could actually shift our planet toward peace consciousness. We could be the tipping point in shifting our planet to peace. I believe that in every fiber of my being. So now the question is, what do you think?